if Ron was in Hufflepuff? Hey, brother! One of the most common and pretty fun Harry Potter theories out there is that the Golden Trio, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, sorted into Gryffindor, actually each represent the other three houses. Harry is Slytherin, the house he was so nearly sorted into. Hermione, the cleverest witch of her age, represents Ravenclaw, and Ron, the ever-loyal best friend, represents Hufflepuff. Now, we've explored the question, what if Harry wasn't Slytherin, and ever since then, one of the most requested what-ifs we've had is, what if Ron was in Hufflepuff? The tricky part about answering this is that, as Ron is so keenly aware, he is not the main character. So if he's not around Harry, it's hard to say how it affects Ron. Is it then a story about Ron being in Hufflepuff, or just Harry not having Ron around? Plus, the other big issue is that there is no obvious moment where Ron was about to be in Hufflepuff. Like, for Harry, the Sorting Hat puts him in Gryffindor because he asks it to not put him in Slytherin. So when we approached Harry and Slytherin, what if, what we had to ask was, what would cause Harry not to ask the hat to sort him otherwise? And believe it or not, the answer was whether he ran into Malfoy in Madame Malkin's shop in Diagon Alley, who first began to spoil Slytherin's reputation. At the end of the day, this was relatively easy to modify because it's not a massive reach to suggest that Harry and Draco simply arrive at the shop at different times. Harry doesn't have a bad taste in his mouth and doesn't get further confirmation from Hagrid when he asks him about the other school houses. And from there, it's just off to the races because so much of Harry's story doesn't have to do with which house he's in necessarily, because a lot of Harry's plot is always going to be forced upon him by Voldemort. Like, before Harry ever even steps into school, he already is and will continue to be very important to the wizarding world at large. Ron's a little bit different though, because so much of his plot revolves around what is happening to Harry, so it's a little harder to imagine what each school year looks like if he's just off being best pals with Ernie Macmillan and Justin Finch-Fletchley. Us old pufflags! I need an Ernie Macmillan in my life. The other big detail in these what-ifs, though, has to do with how the characters' motivations change based on where they are. For example, if Harry doesn't run into Draco, he has no preconceived notions about Slytherin and doesn't ask the hat to sort him elsewhere. And without that request, he just is sorted into Slytherin. This time, though, with Ron, we needed to figure out the opposite. What would prompt him to ask not to be in Gryffindor, especially when he comes from such a long line of Gryffindors and, as the story normally goes, wants to be there. And forever, this has posed a challenge for us to write this series until now, when we were recently asked a question by a viewer on our podcast Through the Gryffindor that cracked the story wide open. So today, we explore what if Ron was in Hufflepuff. Hey, brother! Y'all, real quick, I just want to remind you that our podcast Through the Gryffindor is going on tour again. This time we are hitting the West Coast starting at the end of September, going from Seattle, Washington, all the way down to LA. If you want to come out and be a part of the fun, be sure to check all the links in the description down below. Hope to see you there. Okay, so here is the query that changes everything. What if the Weasleys took Harry as a baby? There are loads of reasons why Dumbledore would push for Harry to be raised by the Dursleys, as he always is. Specifically, his ability to invoke the ancient magic known as the Bond of Blood charm. What that charm means is that while Harry is a resident of Lily's last living relative, he is completely and utterly untouchable by Voldemort. The unfortunate part is that it means Harry is long subjected to life with the Dursleys, who treat him terribly, something that Dumbledore himself laments. You did not do as I asked. You have never treated Harry as a son. He has known nothing but neglect and often cruelty at your hands. So the question we need to kick off with today is whether or not this could have been foreseen before Harry was ever left with the Dursleys. And I believe the answer is unequivocally yes. We know from the very beginning of the saga that one Professor McGonagall spends the day in the wake of Voldemort's downfall, sitting by and watching over the Dursleys. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar, a cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. When Dumbledore later arrives at Privet Drive to oversee Harry's delivery and presumably cast the Bond of Blood charm, he almost seems surprised to see McGonagall.
I should have known that you would be here, Professor McGonagall.
And this is where our mild modification to the story will occur. We are going to argue that Dumbledore sent McGonagall, who is always otherwise his second in command at Hogwarts, to observe the Dursleys to see if they were a proper fit for young Harry. And if actually given this assignment, we know exactly what McGonagall would say. Upon hearing this information, Dumbledore would change course, and instead of leaving Harry with the Dursleys, look for another wizarding family who may be willing to take Harry into their home. Something, again, we know that many wizarding families did offer to do. Dumbledore tells Harry as much. Why could some wizarding family not have taken you in? Many would have done so more than gladly, would have been honored and delighted to raise you as a son. So naturally, it's easy to take a look at the wizarding landscape to see if the Weasleys would be a fit for this potential offer, keeping in mind that at this point they would have 7 kids of their own, including a newborn Ginny. Would they be the family? And I'm inclined to say yes, and beyond a shadow of a doubt. For one, the Order of the Phoenix has been hard at work battling Voldemort all this time, and while Arthur and Molly were not members of the original Order, we know that Molly's 2 brothers, Fabian and Gideon, were. And I've always personally assumed that the key reason why Arthur and Molly didn't join up is because they were too preoccupied with raising their young and large family. But on that exact note, raising a family is something that they do exceptionally well, and even as it stands, Molly comes to see Harry as a son, providing him a place to stay whenever needed, sending gifts for every holiday, and even going so far as to say, "He's not your son," said Sirius quietly. "He's as good as," said Miss Weasley. I've probably over-explained it at this point because we all know how incredible Molly and Arthur are, but you get the idea. The Weasleys would volunteer and Harry would go to live at the Burrow. So, how does this change things? Well, it's hard to ignore the really obvious ripple effects. For one, Harry and Ginny would grow up as siblings, so their future relationship status is pretty modified towards continuing to be siblings. Harry would also be far more informed on the wizarding world, and while his exchange with Draco at Madame Malkin's is what normally turns him away from Slytherin, I think growing up in a house full of Gryffindors would likely turn his head towards Gryffindor specifically. I have no struggle at all believing that he'd want to be in the house of his parents and adopted parents. Also, for what it's worth, I still think Harry ends up getting Hedwig from Hagrid upon turning 11, who would still have been the one to recover Harry from the wreckage after the attack by Voldemort, and would still have a reason to dote on Harry, just a little bit.
You're a wizard, Harry.
I know.
I shouldn't have said that.
No, I knew Hagrid. But how does the addition of Harry to the Weasley family from a young age affect their other youngest son, Ron? At first glance, it seems like great news for Harry and Ron. They get to meet 10 years sooner and kick off their epic friendship right out of the gate. We all know that while Harry and Ron's friendship is near immediate on the train, Ron can't help but deal with his own insecurities as time moves on. He knows Harry can't help being the chosen one and getting all the attention and being famous, but the fact is, he is. And Ron, even from a young age, wants to stand out amongst his impressive brothers. 5, said Ron. For some reason, he was looking gloomy. I'm the 6th in our family to go to Hogwarts. You could say I've got a lot to live up to. Bill and Charlie have already left. Bill was head boy, and Charlie was captain of Quidditch. Now Percy's a prefect. Fred and George mess around a lot, but they still get really good marks, and everybody thinks they're really funny. Everyone expects me to do as well as the others, but if I do, it's no big deal, because they did it first. That's what Ron is usually up against with his brothers, but now Harry is also in that mix, and as impressive as Bill and Charlie and Percy and Fred and George are, Harry probably still has all of them beat before he even gets to school.
Wicked.
Like just for a small example, imagine Harry getting an owl from Hagrid for his birthday and Ron then inheriting Scabbers instead. Great.
Pathetic, isn't he?
This insecurity gets the best of him even just as friends. For example, in Goblet, when Harry's name is selected for the Triwizard Tournament, or how Voldemort uses Ron's own worst fears against him to try to deter him from destroying the locket. Now you've got Ron, who has always already struggled with where he stands as a Weasley and Harry's best friend. Now he has both of those challenges morphed into one.
Yeah, that's me. Ron Weasley, Harry Potter's stupid friend.
So they arrive at Hogwarts for their first year, make their way into the Great Hall, the sorting ceremony begins, and first years are called alphabetically to be placed in their houses. Potter, of course, comes before Weasley, and Ron watches as Harry is sorted into Gryffindor and greeted with cheers by the rest of his family.
Better be
Gryffindor!
And to be fair, also Harry's family, but you get the point. Now, I don't think that Ron hates Harry or anything, but there is a big difference in being the chosen best friend of the chosen one and being the brother he will always and inevitably be compared to. So in that moment, realization hits Ron and he knows what he has to do. Not Gryffindor. Not Gryffindor. Not Gryffindor, eh? Well, that's more than enough. Better be Hufflepuff! And just like that, Ron defies all expectations from the House of Weasley and takes a seat with the Hufflepuffs. Okay, so where to go from here? Because as we mentioned, it's a little tricky to navigate Ron's daily course load as a Hufflepuff because we simply don't have enough information. However, his feelings of being overshadowed by Harry aren't liable to go away. Given this choice though, it's unlikely he goes out of his way to hang out with Harry and likely just does befriend Ernie Macmillan and Justin Finch-Fletchley. Or as I like to call him, JFF, because Justin Finch-Fletchley takes forever to say. You know what? Maybe just Jeff.
That Lockhart's something, isn't he? Awfully brave chap.
My name is Jeff.
Yes, Jeff. But how is Harry's year different without Ron? Well, the weird thing is that Harry grew up with the Weasleys. He is kind of already filled in on a lot of the things Ron usually fills him in on. Like, usually Ron is Harry and Hermione's source of info about wizard culture, but now Harry just knows that stuff. And speaking of Hermione, are she and Harry still besties? Because usually it's Ron's harsh words that send Hermione into the bathroom on the night of the troll attack, but this time he won't be around to be bothered by her, so they wouldn't end up tackling the troll together like usual. That said, I do suspect that Harry and Hermione end up friends anyway, and rather than Ron, it's Neville who slots in as Harry's other best friend, and I suspect the Remember All situation is the catalyst.
The only problem is, I can't remember what I've forgotten.
Harry defends Neville like usual, thus bringing the two of them closer, and without Ron to serve as a buffer to Hermione, she too is impressed by Harry's chivalry in the situation, even if she doesn't love the fact that he broke the rules to do so, but hey, that's just first year Hermione, right?
I'm going to bed before either of you come up with another clever idea to get us killed, or worse, expelled.
But if the Remember All situation happens, then Harry would still make the Quidditch team as a first year, gaining him huge notoriety, and he'd be joining Fred and George in the process. You can only imagine how Ron feels about that. Not only does Harry get to be on the team as a first year, but he gets a brand new Nimbus 2000. Meanwhile, Ron's just riding around on a Swiffer. Come on, Scabbers, let's go Swift! Even if there was a T in there, a Swifter, it would be better. You know, it's got some speed. Normally though, Ron is just so impressed with Harry for making the team in the Nimbus 2000 because of how much they can shove it in Malfoy's face, but this time it's just something else that Ron didn't get. And if you can believe it, Harry is probably even better at Quidditch than normal this time around, having grown up with Charlie Weasley to look up to. Like, not only is he more practiced on a broom, but he knows about Quidditch ahead of time and specifically has a great seeker to look up to. That probably stings if you're Ron too, like, ah, great. That could have been me. If only Harry wasn't around. But cool, now you have something else to bond with our coolest brother over. Nice. As long as he doesn't help you smuggle a dragon later, I'm good. But back to Quidditch. Slytherin gets destroyed by Harry and the Nimbus, as does Hufflepuff, which of course Ron doesn't love, but that's getting just a little bit ahead of ourselves, because before that, Draco still challenges Harry to the midnight duel and still tries to frame him for being out of bed, but Ron of course does not join in on the adventure because he's just in Hufflepuff. So instead, Harry, Neville, and Hermione find Fluffy, which also helps to cement their friendship. Aw, man. I didn't get to see the three-headed dog either, which is important because they won't have the whole troll attack to bond over because usually it's Ron who sends Hermione into the bathroom in need of rescue, but he's not there. So the troll just attacks and Harry ends up back in the dormitory, which doesn't really change much. Snape still heads off Quirrell and the teachers just deal with the troll. Harry still ends up seeing Snape is injured after trying to get his Quidditch book back from him later, so he's still suspecting Snape. Christmas is a little odd because Mr. and Mrs. Weasley go to visit Harry's best friend Charlie, so despite having a place to go, Harry still spends the holidays at Hogwarts with Fred, George, Percy, and Ron, who is admittedly a lot lonelier not being in the Gryffindor common room, something Harry is quick to notice.
Happy Christmas, Ron. What are you wearing?
Good people, Harry. Now, all the Weasleys pretty much hang out during this holiday anyway, and I think that stays true, but Harry and Ron specifically hang out a little more in the absence of the rest of the school. Ron thoroughly enjoys beating Harry at chess a few times and is able to realize that any jealousy he feels isn't really Harry's fault.
That's wizard's chess.
On that note, I also think that Harry realizes that Ron is feeling a little overshadowed by him, which is why, after his first night out in the invisibility cloak, he also sneaks down to the Hufflepuff common room and wakes Ron up to show him the mirror and his parents. And geez, you can just imagine how this scene would be very different if they grew up in the same household. Ron sees Harry as having everything he's ever wanted, but what Harry sees is a different set of parents he never knew. And Harry is able to see pretty plainly that Ron feels overshadowed by not just him, but the entire family.
Hello, good.
It's a nice moment, and the two seem to understand each other a bit more. But then after break, Harry absolutely thrashes Hufflepuff in a school record fashion, and a bit of Ron's insecurities return. 11-year-olds, am I right? Taking everything all personally.
Yeah, that's me. Ron Weasley, Harry Potter's stupid friend.
After this is when Hagrid gets Norbert, and there's an odd change that happens. Normally, Ron is the one who writes to Charlie, Harry's best friend, to ask him about getting Norbert out of the school, but now Harry can just write to him himself because he's his best friend, and not involve Ron at all. Dearest Charlie, first of all, you wouldn't believe how I thrashed Hufflepuff. That move you taught me, simply amazing. BT dubs. Hagrid has a dragon. It's also Ron who Draco usually steals a book from to get the information about the night that they're going to get Norbert out of the school. So with no Ron now, that doesn't happen either. So without Draco tipping off McGonagall, do Hermione and Harry just successfully get Norbert out of the castle without getting detention? And alas, earwax, no. Charlie returns Harry's letter, but addresses it to his youngest brother, and thus the owl mistakenly delivers it to Ron, his youngest biological brother. And Ron, who is still upset about the Quidditch match and annoyed Charlie and Harry are making secret plans without him, gives Harry the letter, but then himself tips off McGonagall or Filch or whoever.
Oh dear, we are in trouble.
Which importantly means that Harry, Hermione, and Neville all still get detention with Hagrid in the woods, where, as ever, Harry runs into Voldemort for the first time. And that's a fairly important encounter because it's when Harry realizes that Snape is stealing the stone for Voldemort, not himself, and provides Harry with proper motivation to try and stop him.
Snape doesn't want the stone for himself. He wants the stone for Voldemort.
Which brings us to the obstacle course, and let me know what you think of this. Rather than Harry, Hermione, and Ron, it's Harry, Hermione, and Neville. But what about the chess set, you ask? Without Ron, how will they overcome it? Well, if you subscribe to Dumbledore's big plan, then the chess set is there because Dumbledore knows Harry will bring his friends and each of them will have to contribute, and that's what Ron is good at. But if Dumbledore knows Ron isn't coming, it won't be there. Or even better, the chess set is there and Harry now has to solve it himself, which he is only capable of doing because he has been playing chess against Ron for his whole life, not instead of just like since Christmas. And personally, I love that version because can Harry beat Ron at chess? No. But was knowing Ron vital to his success? Yes. Also, I think that Neville, rather than Hermione, solves the devil's snare because, you know, herbology. And so they advance. Harry finds the mirror, defeats Quirrell, saves the day, and Gryffindor wins the House Cup. And one of the big things I want to try to point out here is that I know Ron seems like a bit more petty in this version of the story, but it's, again, not that he hates Harry or anything. He just wants to be noticed for who he is, and he's obviously still really happy about Harry's second defeat of Voldemort and that he didn't die. And Harry is sure to thank him afterwards, telling him that he never could have done it without losing to Ron for all of those years.
That's wizard's chess.
And that about brings us to the end of year one and the end of today's video, where the first year of school for Harry and Ron went about as badly as it could have, and then some from Ron's perspective. Harry had continued to be very important, very special, and succeed in a multitude of ways, and Ron continued to feel a little bit more in the shadows. But it's also very important to remember that Harry himself realizes and recognizes the importance of having Ron in his life. But be sure to tune in next week for part 2, where we will continue to dive down the rabbit hole. Or Weasley hole? Weasley hole. Does that sound bad? Doesn't sound great. I think we can all agree on that. But guys, as always, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If this is the first week that this came out, this won't be live yet, but as of next week, this video right over here will be part 2 if you want to continue on in the saga. Otherwise, until next time, bye!